Welcome to Making the Impossible Inevitable podcast. This show is for those who see progress as a calling, not just a choice. Hosted by former Navy SEAL and transformational guide Curt Cronin, each episode explores the mindset, strategies, and stories of extraordinary leaders who've turned the impossible into reality. These episodes are more than just conversations. They're a challenge to you to expand your capacity, shatter inner limitations, and lead with unshakable purpose. Together, let's make the impossible inevitable.
Welcome to the Impossible to Inevitable podcast, where we dive into the moments, mindsets, and maps that transform life-altering obstacles into breakthroughs that serve humanity at scale. Today's guest is someone whose story lives at the intersection of improbable survival and unshakable spirit. Keiron McCammon is many things: seasoned tech entrepreneur, world-class endurance athlete, and one-handed paraglider who has literally soared across continents. But none of those titles come close to capturing the essence of his journey. In 2006, while paragliding in the Andes of Colombia, Keiron collided with power lines that suffered catastrophic injuries that would claim his left hand and nearly his life. What followed wasn't just a recovery, it was a total reinvention. One that required navigating trauma, identity, and the brutal calculus of choosing to let go of what no longer served him, literally and metaphorically. Keiron didn't just get back up, he charged forward. 10 months, 10 triathlons, multiple Ironmans, summit of Kilimanjaro, a memoir in the works, and perhaps most notably, a deep presence and spiritual clarity that radiates from him like a tuning fork for grace, grit, and growth. In this conversation, we unpack the model he now lives by: accept what is, forgive what was, let go of what no longer serves, and thrive through adversity. It's a roadmap for anyone who's ever found themselves in the free fall between life before and life after. And while Keiron's body bears the scars of the impossible, his life is a testament to what becomes inevitable when you align your courage with compassion, resilience with purpose, and do it all in service of something greater than yourself. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Impossible to Inevitable podcast. Today is going to be an electric session with my dear friend Keiron McCammon. We've gone through so many different adventures and journeys together that I have no idea where he's going to take this one. So, Keiron, welcome.
Good morning. How are you, sir?
Oh, fantastic. So, as one of my heroes that's done so many impossible things, where would you like to kick off on? What's something that was impossible in your life that you've made inevitable or that has already come to pass?
Oh, impossible that became inevitable. Well, I could say, I guess, shorting across power lines was pretty impossible, but I made it inevitable. So does that count?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not sure I recommend that one. As I always say, electrifying experience, not one I would care to repeat or recommend.
Well, that one's one that was probably is now inevitable, but I think that the part that was impossible was your journey to healing and your journey to being more whole to follow than before.
I was certainly, at the time, that was a completely uncharted path for both myself and my wife, Kerry. Yes, it was after waking up on the ground, after colliding with the power lines, I guess everything was upside from that point forward, but probably the most uncertain that I have ever been or could ever be in life, I guess, in terms of what the hell was going to happen next, particularly since we were still in Colombia at that point.
Well, I should have known that of all the stories, that would be the most intimate one that you would dive into. I would love to. Can you give everybody a little bit of context as what led you up to that moment? And then I think it's an unbelievable journey of impossibilities made inevitable.
Yeah, I guess the little bit of the backstory. I was on a paragliding trip, which is flying around with a canopy, and had been flying for probably better part of 12 years at that point, various parts of the world, and we had just launched my first startup. I was one of the co-founders, kind of the chief technical officer and co-founder at a company called Caboodle, which was a precursor to what Pinterest is today. But we just launched after a year of kind of heads down, building out the technology and all the infrastructure, and did a big, our CEO, my partner, did a big demo. And then as a reward, I headed off on a 10-day paragliding trip in the Andes in Colombia, South America. And it was on the penultimate day of that trip that we were flying to a new area, and I was flying cross country somewhere I'd never really flown before, and on our way to a new location for that evening with a chase car, my wife with my guide who had a bad foot from a previous week's guiding, so I ended up being flying alone in the air. The guy I was flying with had landed, and I couldn't see where he landed, so the good old ego was, I'm going to fly the furthest today, and decided to fly on into unknown territory. And don't really remember a lot. I have very fragmented recall of discrete moments of just kind of awareness, somewhat alarm in a way of just from the point that I remember deciding to fly on, then flying in kind of the backside of a ridge, which is never a good place to be given the air turbulence, getting lower as the sun was setting, and over a bunch of pine trees, I think it was, thinking, well, there's no good options to land down there, and trying to push forward into the wind to get back to the ridge. And then the next thing I remember at that point was coming over the top of kind of the knoll of a hill and seeing a landing field that just on the edge of a small village, thinking, okay, this is great, made it. And as I was coming over that, the next thing I remember is seeing power lines running kind of across where I was flying, and I'm right-handed, so immediately kind of pulled the control handle to turn the wing. And what I didn't realize, and I don't remember the rest, was there was another set of power lines running down the right-hand side. And so I ended up flying into those lines, and as best I can piece it together afterwards, probably bodily shorting across lines with my right leg and which I don't have now, but my left hand. And in those things, whether it's paragliding or skydiving, if you ever climb with power lines, typically you don't get electrocuted, unless, like me, you probably touch both two lines, but the fall to the ground would kill you. So, I guess you could say it was pretty impossible for me to end up sitting on the ground in my paragliding harness, still holding the control handles, with my paraglider wrapped around the lines above as I kind of looked up, and I'm sitting there literally the same distance as the lines of my paraglider, stretching to the ground, thinking, wow, I guess the fall didn't kill me either. Wasn't really sure what happened at that point, but was lucky enough that a couple of locals, and I vaguely maybe remember some shouts before I hit the lines. That's hard for me to piece together, but they came running up the hill, were able to get me off the hill into their beaten old truck. Got to the local clinic in this small little village where, 20 minutes or so later, my chase car, with Kerry in it, was able to come and meet me, obviously in pretty bad shape at that point. Do you remember?
So, Keiron, you're a master of the skies, just to make sure for everyone else. I thought it was amazing that we used to jump out of planes at 25,000 feet on oxygen, and we might go 15 to 25 kilometers. But in this case, you're literally soaring at altitudes from where to where, and I think on this journey you go in 60 to 100 miles easy in a journey, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, in my flying career, I guess I'd flown 12, 13, 14,000 feet, depending on where you're taking up from, and you just ride the same as the birds do, same as a glider does, just ride the thermals. And then I think my longest flight was probably over 4 hours, and what would that have been, 50, 60 plus kilometers or so. And I was a relative, that was not extreme distances or time in the air by any means. But yeah, it's, you go fly in challenging terrain. It's certainly an adventure sport. But it was amazing for the time that I got to do it.
So just so everyone's like, so you get to be the privilege of being in the remote locations, the most gorgeous scenery, the most crazy mountains, and so you walk through it. But imagine taking off, going 50 or 60 miles in a foreign country in the jungle in the middle of nowhere, and then one, power lines appear, two sets of power lines appear, three, your guide for the day is out, and all of a sudden, like, so the stack of things to now lead you to, I think it was just off hanging, waking up hanging just off the ground, in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it was it's the old stacking of events that, looking back on it, is actually, as many people I think said through the following journey, or the journey that followed after, and again, I consider myself extremely lucky to be alive. Any one of those things could have easily been terminal for sure, but touching power lines, whatever reason, that impossibility of surviving that obviously became inevitable, not necessarily through my own planning, but just the nature of the circumstances.
To include, as I recall, you were hanging just over or just near a road?
There was kind of a small landing area down in the small village, and I could see the road. That's why I was going to come in and think, oh, this is going to be easy. I'll land right by the road. But just imagine a kind of a knoll of a hill, and obviously it's, as is in many places, in rural places, you've got power lines strung between valleys, and I think that's ultimately what I ended up colliding with. But it felt... at that point, from what I can remember, it was like, the sense of relief that I'd made it to the landing area right by a road where I would get picked up, and then obviously all hell breaks loose at that point.
So first, the impossible of humans flying. So you've just done it. Humans have been in flight for 4 hours at this point. And now you're starting to wake up, and I don't remember if you spoke Spanish or not, but so fundamentally you wake up, folks are grabbing you, taking you out of your harness, and throwing you in the back of a truck.
Yeah, I mean, once I came to on the ground, I had no idea of what had really happened, other than obviously I collided and fell to the ground. So I didn't know what the prognosis was going to be, I guess. But my left hand, you see, are holding the control lines, the handles. And I remember having to pry the fingers of my left hand because they obviously wouldn't operate at that point. So I had to kind of pry the control handle out of my fingers, thinking, okay, well, there's something wrong there. Didn't know that my leg was badly burnt either. I did call and cell phones.
Were you shocky? Were you... no, you feel like you were
that's
fully
why
coherent?
I think, yet again, I can only piece these bits together, but once I came to on the ground, I had no idea I'd been electrocuted, at least, as much as I can think about it back then. I don't know as if I knew what had happened, and but just knew I'd fallen. So I knew I was injured, but again, didn't know how badly. We did have cell phones, so I remember calling my wife, who was in the chase car. I don't speak any Spanish. There's my wife at that point. My guide was Colombian, so I remember talking to her and saying, "Hey, I've had an accident. I'm on the ground," and she said, "Oh my dear, have you broken anything?" Obviously, very common. If you're going to fall, you would break something. I said, "Oh no, I'm all good." And there's a couple of locals here. Hey, can you pass it to Richie, who was my guide, who was driving the car? And I passed my phone to the two locals. They were at least able to talk to each other and explain, I was in this small village called Aratoka, where the hell we were so he could head that way and where they were going to take me. And then I vaguely remember the trip in this beaten up kind of Ford pickup, I think, or something along those lines, flatbed, or, with a bed on it, and ended up in the local clinic where they were busy, obviously, cutting all my clothes off and trying to assess the damage. So, as I say, interesting times.
And I can't tell you how many times I've gone days without cell reception in locations like that. So another miracle is stacked up in your behavior on your behalf that you can get communications with your wife and with your guide.
Yeah, and the two locals who obviously didn't know, who probably didn't even know what the hell I was doing, hanging below power lines, if you like. But
Falling from the sky.
Yeah, exactly. It was the proverbial Icarus flown too close to the sun, for sure. I think that there is an element of that parable that rings true.
So you get to the first clinic, and tell me what's changing for you now. You went from tech entrepreneur, soaring around the world, following sport around the world, and having the time of your life, and now all of a sudden you're in a clinic starting to figure out, how badly injured am I?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously where, and I don't remember being in any pain. So obviously the body is an amazing thing. I guess the adrenaline and everything was pumping. But the realization of, okay, this, I had to be helped off the hill and couldn't really walk. So you could start to see, and I don't necessarily remember the smell of burning flesh, but obviously they started to cut everything off and wash everything down with saline. You could kind of get an idea that something pretty serious had happened at that point. But I was still pretty out of it. Hard at that point to assess. I think it took us from there it was an hour and a half-ish in the back of it. I remember them loading us into the ambulance vaguely. I was sitting kind of somewhat upright in a stretcher. It looked like a hearse somewhat. It wasn't like an ambulance. It was more like a hearse-sized ambulance. And
like a Ghostbusters ambulance.
Yeah, exactly. It was like the Ghostbusters ambulance. But it wasn't even white. Maybe I'm making that up. But poor Kerry had to sit with me in the back of crammed into the back of this thing. I don't know what it was like for her. It was, at that point, late in the day, hot. I mean, the smell of burning flesh must have permeated the back of the ambulance. So, and we're just winding these same roads that I've been flying over, these mountain tracks and roads, switch turns and everything. So, it must have been an awful experience for her. I was, probably dosed up on something by then, I would imagine, and fairly out of it. But I remember sitting, once we got to the local hospital, which was actually a pretty reasonable, in Bucaramanga, it was a pretty reasonable facility. The first thing I wanted to do was an ultrasound. I just remember at that point kind of praying that as they moved this kind of ultrasound down my arm to assess the damage, that I could see the veins pulsing, and was just kind of praying. It's not necessarily my thing per se, but just praying that the blood flow would still be flowing. But clearly as they went down and further down the arm, forearm, and to the hand, I think that was the first realization. Okay, there's some pretty major damage here. So that was the beginning, I think, of it. The kind of the implications of what had just happened setting in, and then the process of we were in Colombia in that hospital for 5 days, 3 surgeries before we got medevaced back to the US and Mercy Hospital in Miami. We lived in San Francisco. Took us 2+ months, but over 2 months, maybe 3 months before we got back home. And then it was, that was the beginning of, obviously, all you can do is focus on the here and now at that point, but just kind of going through various surgeries, not speaking Spanish in Colombia, my guide translating a bit when he was there. But I mean, experience of being in that environment, to the point where, they were talking about, needing to amputate my hand, and thinking, yeah, we've got to get out. We need to get out of here. Unfortunately, I had medical evacuation insurance, so Kerry was able to put that in process. So yeah, quite the, that was just the beginning, but quite the ordeal. And for me at that point, well, I had an interesting first night after the first surgery, where they forgot, they hadn't, as it turned out, they gave me the self-medication machine, and I was sitting there through the night. Whenever you feel pain, you press this button, and I'd get a little bit of relief. I'd just had a surgery, and my arm was in a cast, and it would last 5 minutes, and then I'd be in pain again, and I'd keep pressing this button. You only press it so many times, the machine would whir, and just wasn't getting any real relief through the night. But made it through the night. Kerry comes in, and I kind of explained to her that I was in a lot of pain and uncomfortable, and she had a Spanish dictionary, so she was trying to explain to the nurses, mal, bad, pretty limited range of Spanish, unfortunately. And finally, I think we got a doctor or something and explained, and they checked the machine and hadn't put the cartridge in properly. So I'd had no pain medication once the medication from the surgery wore off. So that was my first night in, post first surgery in Colombia. After that, I was pretty dosed up on medication.
It still is a great deal of confidence when you can't install the cartridge in the machine.
Yeah, it was like, really, you're kidding me. It's quite funny in hindsight to talk about. But again, it is, as I always, as it keeps reminding me, just the power of the kind of mind, body, spirit through that time. But the ability to get through that night, with or without pain medication, it's just that body is an amazing thing. The mind is an amazing thing. So so that was the beginning. I had a couple of other surgeries before we finally got medevaced out, and then a lot more surgeries after that once we got to Miami, and through that process, understood the prognosis, at least for my hand, and I made the decision to amputate through probably, what was I, 8+ surgeries at that point, hyperbaric oxygen therapy twice a day, at least 5 days a week, and 8 full general surgeries. I think we were in ICU when we first arrived for the first 3-4 days, I think, with Kerry sleeping in the ICU. So it was quite the process of going through, and they tried as hard as they could, for sure, to save my hand and give it enough time, take away all the dead tissue and give it enough time to see if it, what was viable. But through that journey, decided to let go of my hand so I could move on with life.
And what was that journey like, if you can share it, Keiron? Because in the SEALs, we got to prepare for months for a deployment. In sports, when you and I were training for triathlon together, you get regimented workout. This is one where you're in a trial that you had no expectation for, no readiness for. That model of you're fully in the pre-tragic. Everything that you've manifested to life in general has worked out. All of a sudden, you're in the tragic, and clearly now you're in the post-tragic. One of the most difficult parts of that journey is we don't get to know what we'll need when we get to the tragic, and who's required to help us pull us out. I know my deepest tragedy was when Extortion 17 got shot down. Today's Memorial Day, so it's a day of celebrating remembrance of all those we've lost. And so I know without my wife and my mentor, I likely would not have come back from that post-traumatic stress disorder. And remember, my mentor told me, "Hey, Kurt, you can't save anybody else's life by destroying your own." And he said, "I believe in post-traumatic growth disorder." That was a bit of my journey, but to me, the essence of the impossible to inevitable is getting through a tragic experience that you never expected, anticipated, wanted, or would have had in your worst nightmare. And how did you in one sentence said, "And I made the decision to let my arm go." my sense is there's so much more in that, and that's part of the strength of character you have now. You share, what that process was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, in that, going back to that time, I mean, to be where I am now, or even where I was, as I was recovering, certainly felt pretty impossible that I could get, that life, normalcy would return to life, should we say, that, that I would get back to some semblance of a normal life. And obviously, I don't think I have a particularly normal life, but, the life that I now have, it was just absolutely impossible to imagine back then. I had no reference points other than two dear friends of mine from university days and diving buddies who were profoundly deaf. I had really not experienced anyone with any kind of disability. So I had no reference point to know, as I faced the decision of, should I amputate, should I not, what would life be like? As we were going, once we got medevaced out of Colombia and we were in Mercy Hospital, I had some amazing physicians and doctors and care. Absolutely, just awakening for me at that time of how much above and beyond their duty of care as professionals in the medical field, they went above and beyond for both myself and my wife. So, that process was a lot of other people and a lot of things coming together. But in the moment, it felt absolutely, I think, impossible to imagine what life was going to be like. No reference points to think about what life would be like based on the decision that, at some point we may have to make. And so I think what I learned through that process, and very blessed to have the mindset and I say some training to some degree from books that I'd read and things that I'd listened to give me at least the mental fortitude to kind of come back and say, well, I've got to stay in the here and now. If I look at the past, it's kind of that is the tragic, I guess, in a way, because it's all the, woe is me, why me, if only type of dwelling. So I purposefully didn't spend time looking in the past, but I likewise couldn't really look to the future because that was filled with maximal uncertainty of, I've got a startup that I'm a co-founder of that, we just launched and I should be back with my partners. What's going to happen? How long am I going to be here? When am I going to get back? In what condition am I going to get? What would life be like? So to look to the future was just maximal uncertainty. And I guess in some ways, fear, probably if I think about it now, of, to look that far ahead, of just not knowing. And so I just had to focus on, at least for me, where I was right now, day by day. And I think that was very much just kind of chunked down the recovery. So I stayed, here, alive, next surgery, recovery, next surgery, kind of in the routine of the moment and away from what's happened and worrying about what might be. And that was the case for, I would say weeks, if not months, getting through the process. What could I do other than let other people take care of me, which is not something that I had ever let happen other than, when I was born and obviously looked after by my parents. I was independent from a pretty early age and valued that independence. So for the first time was back in that, as an adult, back in the stage of just having to let others take care of me, trusting in others to take care of me, and just focusing on, what I could do in that moment. And I went through, as I reflect back on it, I kind of, and again, didn't have this at the time. This is something I pieced together afterwards. Just the process that I went through, and I remember this was probably after the first surgery, or maybe even before the first surgery in Colombia, all a little bit of a blur. But I very quickly accepted what has happened, and just there was no going back. There was no feeling sorry for myself or blaming others for what had happened, or the power lines for being there, or my guide for having broken his foot in a previous weeks, that he couldn't be flying with me and should have been with me at the time. And if that had been the case, all of those stories that I could have created in that moment. But I just remembered kind of accepting what was. This happened. Whatever happens now going forward, I guess, is a blessing to some degree. But it's happened. Can't undo it. And then more importantly, I took responsibility, because as a pilot, I was the one that took off and chose to take off that morning. I was the one that put myself in that situation, that decided, even though my buddy had landed, decided to fly on, that made the decisions that put me in that place. So there, despite other circumstances, should we say, that all contributed to the stacking effect, at the end of the day, I took responsibility or accountability for what happened, for the decisions that I made that at least put me in that place. Yes, it was an unfortunate accident, but I didn't feel helpless about it, if you like. I just said, okay, this has happened. I'm not going to blame anyone else. This is my decisions. And a little funny anecdote. Normally, every time I would fly, if Kerry was with me, just before I took off, we'd exchange a kind of goodbye kiss. And that particular morning, there was some dust or something got into her camera. So she went back to the truck, and I was waiting. And just as she was at the truck, the wind picked up, and it was, oh, great. So I launched, and then Kerry was kind of, running back from the car to come take pictures. And I remember seeing and thinking, oh, didn't exchange our goodbye, our usual kind of farewell kiss, and thinking, just my luck to go kill myself today. And lo and behold, it didn't quite go that far, but just one of those funny little things that goes, that just popped through my mind. Prescience, who knows what it was, at that moment. But in the hospital, despite I think Kerry had a much harder time with it, hey, this has happened. It's my response. I'm accountable. I'm responsible for what has happened. I'm not going to blame anyone else. I'm not going to blame my guide. I'm not going to blame, the world or whatever it is. Move on. Time just to process this and move forward with it. And then the next thing that happened for me relatively quickly, which I think is step 2, so it's like kind of accept what is, and then forgive myself, because what I took, you could argue, you would call it kind of radical responsibility or accountability. There was no one else to blame other than myself. That didn't mean I was going to go beat myself up and say, you idiot, why did you do that? That's not productive either. So neither did I blame others. I forgave myself. I don't know if it was conscious at the time. I forgave my guide. Again, I just didn't hold any energy of it's my fault or it's someone else's fault. It was just, this has happened. Forgive myself, be grateful for still being alive, to have survived. I don't think I understood then quite what I had survived and how remarkable, I guess, it really was, to have survived kind of shorting across power lines. But I was just absolutely kind of equanimity about it's happened. There is no one to blame, not even myself, certainly not others. okay, from this point, I was able to kind of process, the time in Colombia, getting medevac to Miami, everything I was going through. And so by the time it came where the doctors kind of presented the prognosis saying, well, we're not sure, what's going to happen here with your hand, it was probably 4 to 6 weeks in at that point. I was getting what I thought I was getting was pretty tired from every other day going in for surgery, in between, obviously, all these hyperbaric oxygen therapy twice a day, debridements where they're kind of stripping away the dead tissue whilst you're still in the hospital bed under a local anesthetic. So it was just it felt like I was just getting very physically drained. Obviously, you're dosed up on, I was a Dilaudid at the time, which is like 10 times stronger than morphine. So it was, pretty spaced out, and Kerry had been fighting so hard to save my hand. She's an energy worker. She'd brought in someone, like alternative medicine, also kind of do some energy work on my hand. So, she was working really hard to save my hand. No one quite knew how the hand was, as far as they couldn't really detect any blood flow to the hand. So they weren't even sure how it was still not necrotic, if you like. It was still, somewhat alive. But when faced with the decision, ultimately my decision, or our decision of whether I should amputate or not, it's kind of, this is, leading up kind of the third step in a way, but it was amazingly powerful how sometimes what you would think of as the hardest decision in your life, in my case, chopping off, choosing to have part of my body chopped off, if you like, amputating my hand. How would you ever be equipped to make that type of decision? It wasn't something that happened to me where, I had an accident, I woke up and, like a motorcycle accident, and, the decision had been made for me. It was a decision that I got to make to choose my path forward. And it seems like the hardest decision. Do you keep fighting for the hand? Why would you not keep fighting for your hand? Or do you choose to amputate? When I got clear on what I felt was really important in my life at that stage, did I want to spend the next 9 months in hospital with an uncertain future or prognosis? Maybe they could save the hand, maybe they couldn't, maybe it would just be this charred, kind of clawed hand, wasn't very functional. Or did I want to get back to life? And my draw for me was, I wanted to get back to life. Even without a hand, I wanted to get back to life quicker. I wanted to get out of hospital. I wanted to get back home. I wanted to get back to my startup. I wanted to get back to life again. Got clear on what was important. And the decision to amputate for me was simple. It was very clear in my mind when obviously talking it through with Kerry, my wife, and, making that decision together, it felt very simple to me that the amputation was the right path. One, because I told myself a story, I think, which was one more surgery, I'll be done. Awesome, I'll start to heal and we can get back to our lives and get out of hospital. Didn't quite pan out that way, but that was a good story at the time. And I remember laying outside this particular surgery for the amputation, outside the operating room. Kerry was standing beside me, holding my hand, and at least this is the way I remember it. She remembers it a little bit differently, but she kind of looked to me in the eye and said, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because there's no going back." And, in my mind, I'm thinking, no shit, Sherlock. Yep, they're going to amputate. There's no going back from that one. But what came to me in that moment was really, and what stayed with me post the amputation all the way through, even to this day, was I kind of looked at it and said, it's okay to let it go. And it was that act of, I wasn't losing my hand. I was choosing to let go of something that had no longer served me. It had served me very well for 35 plus years of my life. but I was letting go of something that, if I held on to, could potentially kill me at that point, either through blood poisoning, necrosis. There were very real risks of trying to hold on to the hand and save it. And so that has, those 3 steps have become, a constant theme in my life. In a way, have become a metaphor for how do you get through something that, like in your, as you say, in this case, seems pretty damn impossible. How could you even make that decision for yourself? But it was accepting what is, forgiving myself and others, and kind of being grateful that I was still alive at that point, and then choosing to let go of something that no longer served me. And that, obviously a long story, a long road to recovery afterwards, but that was really, I think, what set me up to be able to move forward in life, and not just, as I like to say, not just survive, but thrive through adversity is my kind of tagline in a way. I just experienced it in, obviously this is a very physical manifestation, with a lot of emotion attached to it, but really learning to come out the other side a stronger, better person. No, don't get me wrong, I would take a hand back any day of the week, but I also wouldn't give up who I am now compared to who I was prior to the accident. So that was, again, long story thereafter, and took way longer. It was much quicker for me to recover physically and emotionally after the accident and get back to my startup and get back to life than it was to repair some of the damage that I had wrought on my relationship with Kerry that really came to a head in that moment. And, the decade of coming back from that and going through many other ups and downs in life. But I've always come back to the accept, forgive, let go.
And you've shared portions of that story with me before, but always so powerful and really present to me this morning. The map you're giving us to get through the tragic, right? The map through the unmappable. And I met Keiron, for everyone listening, I met him. We were both at a conference. I remember sitting down, happened to be directly opposite him at this conference, and thinking, hearing his story as a serial entrepreneur, coder, had just exited Caboodle at this time, and thinking, like, what am I doing here, getting to sit next to someone? And he has this amazing Zen Buddhist presence. I don't think I've ever really seen Keiron mad in a 16-year relationship. So like an amazing ability. Everything he's talking about now is, I've experienced it across almost every domain in life. And so I assumed you were always like that. And then as you told this story, I'm like, oh, it was part of your growth. It was part of your process of living gracefully in the post-tragic. And I love the clarity for you of, hey, I just accepted. And for someone who's having trouble accepting whatever it is, and your story is so powerful because it is a physical embodied, while we're here in 3D, hey, I had to make a choice to let go of my hand. What perspective or what thoughts would you give if someone's struggling to accept?
I mean, it's the first step. I think without acceptance, you can't get to forgiveness. You certainly can't get to letting go of whatever is holding you back, and you certainly don't get to be able to move on and thrive through whatever that adversity or that tragedy is. So it's not easy by any means. It's simple but not simplistic, as they say. I think if I go back to that time of accepting, for me at that stage, it was not a struggle. I did not struggle to accept. I have struggled in other stages of life to accept other challenges or losses or whatever it may be. I was just very, again, I none of this, all of this unpacking I've been able to do after the fact. In the moment, I don't recall thinking about it in anything like this. I just I think part of choosing to do a risk sport maybe, which is my situation. That's not going to be everyone's situation. Some people's may be the loss of a loved one, the loss of a relationship, the loss of a job, the loss of financial security. I can honestly say in mine that as a pilot, as someone choosing to do a risk sport and put myself potentially in harm's way for something that I, enjoyed greatly to do, flying as free as a bird, it came very easy for me to accept that my choices had led to that sequence of events. So I don't know if I can unpack kind of how you accept, other than just accepting what is the first stage. What is, even if it's looking at the world and thinking that everything is screwed up, and what on earth do we do about it, whether it's climate change or whatever, you may look up. I think it's the old, and again, I didn't know any of this at the time, but obviously reading and other parts of my life journey, particularly following more of kind of a Zen and meditative path, everything is perfect just as it is, if it could be no other way. So whatever it is, wherever you are in the life, accepting what is, because at this point in time, there could be no other way. And I also think the intuitive, the mindset I was blessed with at that moment was not just that I accepted what is, but I also stayed away from dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. When you're in it, when you're, processing, for me, whatever happened, it was going to take time for me to just, let alone emotionally recover, but just physically recover. I think if you can accept what has happened and also give yourself the space to just be in it, in that moment, for whatever period of time that it takes, to stay with it and not, it's not that I was there all the time, but stay away from looking at what has happened, the sequence of events, or worrying too much about the future, until you have you've built the mental fortitude to be able to look at what happened and unpack it, to be able to look forward and see a compelling future. I knew, this is many months after that, we were back. It took us, I think, 2.5, 3 months to get back to the San Francisco Bay Area where we lived, for me to finally get back to my startup and with my partners who were so gracious at holding the space for me in the company and my role. An early stage startup is not when you want to lose one of the founders for the better part of 3 months and maybe not even know if they're coming back. It would have been very easy for them to say, hey, the investors, certainly there was some pressure to find my replacement, if you like. Obviously, their money's at risk. I'd put their investment at risk. But I remember I did not drink alcohol because I knew that I was not emotionally equipped to be able to. And I remember having a small glass of wine at home, and it was the first time that I cried from where I was post-accident. I was probably 3, 4, 5 months down. And I knew that I still was not strong enough at that point. So I can't remember, exactly how long, many, many months before I felt I was emotionally balanced to be able to kind of then get back to, okay, now I can drink again and not, not be affected by obviously the nature of the alcohol. But it was a very visceral reminder of, okay, not yet, not ready yet. So hardest thing as an entrepreneur is patience, I've learned. But the hardest thing through that process was you just have to be patient with yourself and give yourself the time and the space.
Well, I love a couple of the key things you brought up were one, the ability to stay in the present. The past filled with regret, the future, and especially in an uncertain environment, your mind can run thousands of scenarios that are completely overwhelming. So your ability to stay in a state of grace, which you both talked is such a crucial aspect, you were able to get into. And so many things were exploding for me as you were talking. All the studies say that most humans will do more to avoid loss than to earn a gain. And so it'd be so easy to focus on, here's what I've lost. And what I've always heard you talk about is you were so clear what you had to gain. Like, what you had to gain was your life back, what you had to gain, and that ability to get into a state of grace no matter what the circumstance and be grateful, I think is one of your superpowers that allowed you to navigate that. And as a coder, I loved how you took, as I always tell people, you're my favorite spiritual technologist, because maybe this is unconscious, but instead of when you're coding a problem, I can't code, but you break it down to what's the small chunks I need to be able to flow through. And so it sounds like in life you do the same thing. Hey, spiritually, I can't integrate this whole process. I'm going to give myself the grace of not requiring myself to try and do this overwhelming process that might put me into a tailspin, but instead I'm going to slowly and patiently, as you've always told me, trust the process, expand as I'm capable. What an unbelievable act of grace for yourself.
Yeah, I think be gentle with yourself. Certainly through this process, I learned to be kind to myself. There was a lot of unpacking that happened, through the process, and certainly in the journey thereafter, where I could, look at my life back then, and selfish is the right word, but maybe self-centered in terms of I did the things I want. I was married. We'd moved over from the UK to the US. My Kerry, who we were engaged at the time but not married, she kind of followed me across, but I continued to do the things that I wanted to do. Whether it was adventure sports, scuba diving, snowboarding, paragliding, tech startups. I left a very secure job because I was feeling like I wasn't growing. I wanted to do something, didn't know what it was, and that's how I ended up getting into doing a tech startup in the early days of the Web 2.0. Facebook wasn't even out of the dorm room. Web. I don't even know we really called it Web 2.0 back then, kind of 2004, 2005 time frame, and it was just the person who I became through that process, where as I said, I think the duty of care that the hospital staff in Mercy, to look after both myself and Kerry, to help her find somewhere to stay. Obviously, we were going to be there for many months. She couldn't sleep in the ICU every night. To my surgeon would come in after my hand surgeon would come in after his last surgery at midnight or 1 o'clock and come in to check on me, and then drive my wife back to her long stay. And it's just they don't know who we are. Even now, to think back on the doctors that we had and the care that they showed, not just for me, but for Kerry to be away. Our family were back in the UK. None of our friends were, all of our friends were obviously back in the Bay Area. But I also woke up to the impact that my actions in the world had on others. I had never considered the consequences, if you like, or the impact that my actions, my choices in life to do what I wanted to do, and if it was good for me, I was good with it, type of thing. And it's not I was a complete arsehole or anything, but it's just I was very much at that stage of my life kind of driven to do the things that I really enjoyed doing, either as a technologist in my career, or certainly in adventure sports. and then seeing the consequences of what I was now putting Kerry through. My business partners, the investors who invested in us in this startup, a year earlier, and that I was now putting in jeopardy. My mum who had to fly across from Spain, my brother, my dear friend who took a week off work to fly in from the Bay Area to, spend time and at least provide Kerry some support and company. I was just surrounded by a moment of just awareness that there is more in the world, if you like, than just me and what I wanted to do. And that was also the beginning of part of the journey of waking up to, and there's a much bigger part of the journey post-accident of just kind of becoming what I hope for sure is a better person, a better husband, a better friend, a better business partner, just someone who, I still enjoy my adventure sports, and it took me a good few years to process this part of it, but I think it did become, it was an accident that put me on a better path in life. And if I look back now, obviously I was paragliding a fair bit, flying all around the Bay Area. I'd had a near brush with power lines when I was flying in Brazil. You saw them at the last minute, was able to turn, and fortunately landed on this, fairly heavy landing, but landed without any injury on this small hole in this little island on a river. So I had to end up finding a way to get across the river. So it was like, okay. It was a little tap by the universe, as I like to call it. And then I was doing a friendly paragliding competition in the Bay Area, and everyone else was flying around the ridge. I decided to go straight across. Typically, once you get lower than the ridge you just kind of taken off from, you can get a lot of air turbulence. So I ended up, my paraglider completely collapsed in front of me, recovered. I was like, okay, great. Carried on flying, didn't change course. My whole canopy collapsed, dived in front, twisted. I ended up having to throw my reserve, and everything was fine, came down safely. Had to get my paraglider out of a tree. And so it was like, that was knock number 2. It was, a harder tap. I think the universe was trying to, just say, hey, are you sure you're doing the right thing here, I guess. Again, that's me making up stories after the fact. The third one was Colombia, obviously, and colliding with power lines. So I guess if you don't listen to the gentle nudges the universe is trying to give you, they just get louder or harder. So it took a pretty hard one, I think, to wake me up to where I was and the trajectory that I was on.
I've always known you to be incredibly resilient.
I'm a slow learner. What can I say?
Well, but I want to make sure we don't miss the third, which is let go. In your model, I would say, I've always experienced your unbelievable lack of attachment. A lot of my work now is, can I be more committed, less attached? In the SEALs, every operation, no plan survives first contact, and so I can feel vibrationally when I'm attached to the plan, and then there's a moment where there's enough chaos where now I'm great in unattachment. For me, it's how can I shorten that friction period where I'm still trying to hold to the original plan versus switch over. Anything you have on and what you do to, I think you've given most of the models of stay in the present, have grace for yourself, don't hold judgment. But anything else on how do you remain committed, unattached? Because obviously, so many successes as a serial entrepreneur, in life across all the main domains, multiple-time Ironman triathlete. How many Ironmans? Full Ironmans?
5 now.
5, and that includes Kona, the preeminent Ironman. So many different contexts that you've done the impossible. The let go piece for me is often the most difficult. So I'd love any of your context on how do you let go so easily. And by easy, you just said, hey, it takes time, but any other perspective on how you do that?
Oh, good question. It's in this case, for choosing to let go of my hand, and that seems like the hardest decision, but it actually, when I got clear on the outcome, what was important, it was the easiest decision. And the fact that I'd framed it just intuitively, as I said, outside of the emergency room, the operating theater rather, of, it's okay to let it go, gave me the fortitude, I think, through, all the steps of the journey and meeting friends and everything else. I never looked at it like I had lost something, and therefore and the way I frame it is, if I framed it as I lost my hand, and that's certainly, vocabulary, you're going to use that terminology, but I always look at it as, hey, I let go of something that no longer served me. But if I looked at it as I'd lost something, I'd be forever looking for it. I'd be ever looking behind for, hey, I lost my hand, or I lost this, or I lost that relationship, or I lost that, that marriage, or that loved one, or whatever it is, versus, getting to the point where, I can choose to let go of something very dear to me as a body part, but let go of something that just moving forward was no longer going to serve me. It could be, and it's, in different stages where I've used this model, it could be I'm letting go of a relationship, a friend, a friendship that is no longer serving me, a behavior that's no longer serving me, a belief system that's no longer serving me, or even angst, or I don't know as I would ever say I've hated someone. That's not kind of where I naturally go to, but holding on to a negative emotion about someone else, the perception that they've done something to you or have done something to me. Again, it's accepting what is, it's happened, taking accountability or responsibility, forgiving myself and that other person, which is not an easy thing to do. I would say in other stages of life, that's a hard thing to sometimes be able to forgive, either sometimes myself or forgive others. But then that third stage of letting go of whatever energetically or otherwise that I'm holding on to, that relationship I'm holding on to, or that attachment to a certain possession or a job or an identity, certainly been one of my cases, holding on to a particular identity and figuring out how that I can let that go, so that I'm never feeling like I've lost something. Letting go of something so I can move on is very different from feeling like I've lost it. Now, how do you let go? I think it's been different in every, in each situation I've gone through it. Sometimes it has taken me years to let go of something, particularly in a business relationship or a personal relationship where I'm holding on to. But I also, we've talked, the idea that, hey, at the end of the day, if I'm holding on to a judgment of someone, well, whatever I'm seeing in someone else is just a reflection of what I have yet to accept in myself. So in many ways, letting go is just being able to unpack and process and say, okay, what is it that I'm not seeing in myself? What is it I'm not accepting in myself? And often that is a way that energetically I can let things go. But there's usually a period where I can kind of, I've managed to just put that weight down, take that rucksack of lead off and just put it on the ground, and I can just breathe again, I can just feel taller again, and I can now kind of move forward from that place. Again, none of this is necessarily easy, accept, forgive, let go. Seems so simple, but far from simplistic. I wish I could I think everyone's in a unique place. But I think if you can at least understand that you're not going to be able to let go if you haven't accepted and forgiven yourself and others. You can't forgive yourself and others. You haven't accepted what has happened and just the reality of what is. You can't jump to number 3. You certainly can't jump to number 4 and thrive through adversity and move on if you haven't been through the first 3. So like it or not, you've got, at least for me, I'm not saying it's going to work in every single situation in life, but it's certainly been something that I've been able to use many times.
Well, we haven't gotten to your greatest superpower yet of living a life of unreasonable joy, right? And so what keeps flashing for me today as you're sharing is, it'd be very easy to remain attached to here's what I've lost, because that's concrete, right? You have concrete evidence. Hey, here's what I've lost, and so to live there is to always, to your point, be lacking and in judgment and in resentment. And then it'd be easy because that's the easiest thing that's right in front of you to hold on to. Or you can lean into an unknown future of unreasonable joy. And to me, like that is the radiance you bring to every room, is bringing that unreasonable joy. But like I've learned that from you. Tell us how you get to this state of unreasonable joy. The easy path.
Well, if I knew that, I would live there all the time. And when I say unreasonable joy, just to clarify, yes, I'm not saying it's just joy without reason. I'm not saying that it's a level of joy that no one in the world has ever experienced. It's not that.
It's not a significance thing.
Yeah, it's not a significance. It's not like it's a level of. It's just unreasonable joy. Joy without reason. Just joyful without any external stimulus. I don't live there. I have moments. I touch on it at times. I've certainly touched on it on various journeys and experiences, both through meditation and breath work and others. So I have experienced it to know it as a reference point. And it is something that, and again, aspiring to it is the wrong thing, because it's a state of being. I think it is our natural state. I think our align with the Dalai Lama, the laughing Buddha. It's just, kids are just so, most of the time, just so joyful until the weight of the world is put upon them. So I think it's just trying to get back to, and remember, it's a remembering that this is our natural state, and it's the moments I touch on it is when you're just in the supermarket or walking down the road, or out looking at the trees or whatever it may be, or just seeing other people, and for no other reason. I often get this, bizarrely enough, sitting on a plane on flights, I can often tap into just a level of just pure, like, how amazing is this? How amazing is this life? How amazing these beautiful human beings around me, or the scenery that I have. And it's just this upwelling of, it wasn't there one moment ago, and there's nothing that I consciously thought or someone gave to me or did for me. It's just a moment where it's an upwelling of, wow, just pure joy for no reason. And you can certainly feel, and I have felt and do feel, joy for reasons. Snowboarding or scuba diving, things. There's nothing wrong with that joy either. It's just, how can I live more in that state? Is certainly something to meditate on for sure. And as I say, there's no other way to get there. There is no. It's not outside of us. It's just it's there. It's just a remembering, I think, and just remembering it more often.
Well, and many of you that know us will know this, but we're part of an accountability group we call the Honey Badgers, which has really been a 15-year accountability group. And there's probably at least 7 or 8 transitions in my life I wouldn't have made without that group. And so you touched on it with Carrie, and you brilliantly talked about this model for how you individually get into that state. But but there's always interactivity, right? And as you talked about the journey from my kids going from dependence to independence, and as you talked about the arc of your story, I also heard you move into a deeper interdependence, both with Carrie and with others. And I would love to get, I know for myself, when I first went into the tragic, and I'm with my wife and my mentor, I likely would not have come out of that. And so part of the miracle of you can't bootstrap yourself, and you have to trust that, you know, the right people will show up when the journey begins. Any insights on that interdependence, how that increased with Carrie? And you talked about the caregivers and all the humans that showed up for you, that many you didn't even know. The gentleman that picked you up, you know, from off the road, like all of kind of the interdependence that unfolded for you, where we really have that sense of separation. I don't think it's possible to have that unreasonable joy when we're in judgment and driving separation from others instead of being interconnected. But I love any of your insights or perspective there.
No, I think that's a great way to look at it. It is, I'd lived prior accident most of my time in that state of independence, and egoically very tied up with the idea of being independent. I think generationally we are, Gen X, a very independent, individualistic generation to some degree. Having the accident and starting to see the impact of my actions on others and how others show up, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say I don't know if I would have survived without Carrie being with me and being present on that trip, and the care she gave me, despite which but the story she shared with me many years later as I was starting to write this down, and
when you were more ready for it, as she waited.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I could have processed it necessarily back then. She claims, I think she told me back then, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, if you did, I completely blanked it.
Your brilliance of you blocked out that which you couldn't accept.
I was like, yeah, I'm not hearing that. But yeah, I mean, that morning on that particular trip, she had finally the last straw and had decided that when we got back that she wanted to separate and leave me, and obviously that very day I have my accident. So I didn't know any of that at the time. Something she shared much later as we were repairing our relationship and getting back to a state of interdependence in our relationship. But it was thrust on me. I mean, I was forced to be in a state of dependence on others. That was a very unusual place for me to be. Very much dependent on Carrie to be my advocate through all of the surgeries, all of the hospitalization, the care of others. My co-founders, Manish and Chetan, to keep the company going. Fortunately, we had enough of a team there to keep my position and role open. Very much grateful for Manish, who was my partner as CEO of the company. And ended up dialing into one of the board meetings from my hospital bed in Mercy Hospital, I think it was, with Carrie kind of holding the computer there. Just say, hey, I'm still alive, still here, coming back. But that began a journey that expanded me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, to realize that we are all interconnected. And the journey that, and again, that was, a lot happened over the next decade or so, both in our relationship as well as emotionally, in life, startup life, learning to meditate and get into more of a spiritual practice, which ultimately, really was I think saved my life. I mean, getting through my accident was nothing compared to the existential crisis I went through a few years later that I had to figure out how I got myself out of. But it was coming back and just realizing that, and where we are now, and where I am now, obviously with our Honey Badger group, is just being in and holding space in interdependence. And it's the old kind of, to me, things happen to me, I'm a victim, by me, individualistic, everything happens because I make it happen. Through me, the ability for me to elevate myself to the point where things are happening not because I'm doing it, but I'm just a channel for things to happen. And seeing other people, whether it's in a professional setting and my teams, not just me doing things and being in the startup, but my teams doing things and being successful through their success. And then ultimately, getting to that just by me state, which I think is a state of, which again, I can touch at times through meditation, breath work, and others of just...
As me.
As me.
People want to hear it as by me, but it's as me.
Yeah, as me. Yeah, exactly. It's just as me. Sorry, it's just and I think it's just being, realizing that I'm not overly religious from that standpoint, probably more non-theistic, but just the sense that we're all connected at some kind of deep level. And I think that's the ultimate probably state of interdependence, I guess, where you can get to that state of oneness as it's called, where, you just realize that, all of consciousness is just one. And so, it's a, but I think, I would never want to give up who I am now, the journey that I've gone through, as much as I would love to get another hand. And hey, I think it's a temporary condition. They're going to know how to grow me a new hand at some point, or I'm going to, truly a Luke Skywalker bionic
I figure you'll
hand.
work that out.
I would say it's a decade away, and we're 2 decades in now. It's still a decade away. I'll get it at some point.
We did such a brilliant job laying out the individual journey. I want to do one more click. Coming off of a recent Honey Badger experience on that interdependence, I think earlier on as a group, because that group is an impossible to inevitable, right? And there's many of those transitions I wouldn't have made early on. I think we thought, or at least from my perspective, we were trying to fix each other, right? The good news is in the mirror we could see, hey, in a long relationship like that, Kurt's about to go on a bender or Kieran's about to go off a cliff. You can start to see it. And so I think most recently it's been fascinating as we transcended. Remember, for me personally, the last session we did, I love building my decks and making sure, hey, here's where I'm going in life and here's my projection. And it was the first time I couldn't do any deck at all. I just could not present anything, and realized the depth of the group. And one of the biggest transformations to me was, presenting, hey, here's the thing I'm most ashamed of, the story that has been the greatest lie that's held me back, and how embarrassing that was and difficult that was to share with the group. But in the group, it really had nothing that had to be done other than to hold that presence. The greatest gift we can give to someone else is our time and our presence. And so it was fascinating to me. The next level of interdependency in community is the awareness that if we're not separate, we can present anything. And in today's world, where most people have the mask of I'm CEO, CMO, CTO, whatever that mask is, and then we wonder why we can't connect because we're wearing that mask that prevents us from actually connecting. So I always love any of your insights on how we've transcended that wonky journey from first going Honey Badger was, hey, I'm going to force you to see a truth you're not ready to see. And you really brought that out in the last one. Hey, if you expand them beyond the capacity, then it's actually damaging, right? Because it's beyond what they're ready for at the moment. And I think now it is much more we're going to allow you to be who you are. And the the more vulnerable each of us get, the more it allows us to heal and grow.
Yeah, I mean, for a group, as we were reflecting during our recent times together, I mean, we're a group that's been together and has seen each other and has seen our patterns of behavior in a very intimate way.
Our amazing patterns of behavior.
Yes, our remarkable patterns of behavior. Obviously, you know, we're connecting every 6 weeks. We meet up every year, so we have extremely intimate and personal, you know, discussions and vulnerabilities through our time together. And I think my reflection was, hey, we've seen so much. Like any relationship, it would be easy, and it is easy to, going into any conversation, to then come in with a judgment of, oh my word, Kurt's doing it again, or so, you know, I don't know how many times I've told this guy, just stop hitting yourself with the hammer, it'll stop hurting. And yet, can we still come into each discussion? I think I borrowed kind of the Buddhist phrase of with beginner's mind, where you've got to be able to drop all of those judgments and just come in with fresh eyes and fresh ears to hear and see that person, and not be caught up in the history that we've all been together. I mean, it's good context, but if we start just pattern matching, then we can't be of service to each other. And I think that was the insight I had, is, hey, can we, given everything we now have experienced with each other, beyond our, you know, truly intimate relationships with our spouses, it is the most intimate other relationship, you know, given all of that, can we still serve each other? And are we each by ourselves servable? Because if we can't put everything aside coming into any of our calls or meetings and see and hear each other afresh, then how can I serve you? How can I serve the group? And given everything we know and all the discussion we had, can I come into the group as someone looking to be served? Can I be servable? Or will I just hear what someone is saying to me and say, oh God, I've heard them say that, they're just judging me because of X. We've got to be able to drop all of that. So I think it was just that, hey, given everything we've been through, 15, 16 years, can we still be of service to each other? Can we still each be servable? Can we put all of that aside and still come into every conversation with a beginner's mind, with fresh eyes, with fresh ears? And, you know, I think that was the challenge for us coming into that last time together. And I think, you know, we come out of it stronger with that awareness. And I think that holds in any, whether it's with our spouses, you know, reflecting on it, you know, as you do anything, as you do anything in life, is how you do everything. So it's coming into, you know, my intimate relationship with Kerry and we've been together 30 plus years now, I think, and still being able to come in and you know, have her, you know, want to serve her and be servable by her, coming in with fresh ears, with fresh eyes into that relationship. It was an interesting, fun and enlightening discussion.
And I think it's fascinating for anyone listening. Hey, I wish I would have a group like that. You know, the difficulty of maintaining that commitment, non-attachment. You know, it is every single year there's kind of angst building into the annual offsite of, okay, how do we do this thing? Do I want to get that vulnerable at the next level that I didn't know existed in front of you know, my peers? And so the requirement, that commitment that's required from each of us to be able to hold that, because the moment that we don't show up then all is lost. And so it's a fascinating interdimensional, interpersonal relationship, as you bring in a group of that size.
Yeah, and one of the things came to mind, which we talked about, was the idea of, given everything we know of each other and where we may, in our own minds, kind of say, Kurt should really be here, type of thing. With everything, he should really be here. Being able to meet each of us where we are in that moment, to absolutely hold the space and the desire for them to continue, for all of us, each of us, to continue to grow and expand in whatever areas, are relevant. But it's being able to come into that setting and just be able to say, wherever they are in that moment, I've got to meet them there. And I can't have expectations that, they shouldn't be doing this anymore. How are they still following this pattern, for heaven's sake? It is like, no, that's just where they are, and I've got to love the journey they're on, not the journey I think they should be on, and meet them there, and then discover how I can serve them from that place. And obviously, that place is going to change, has changed for each of us. There's always a couple of us that are on an up cycle. There's always a couple on the down cycle, which is the beauty of having a group like this, is everyone's at a different stage, even energetically, age gap-wise, all in a different stage in careers, in life. It's a great melting pot. But I think, again, the insights I get from working in this, being blessed to be able to work in this group, is be able to take away those insights and say, how do I meet people where they are? How can I serve them? But also realize that if I can't serve them, recognize that. If they're not servable, given where they are in their life or whatever it is, then I may still want to serve them, but if they're not servable, then there's not a meeting at that point. And so
accept, forgive, let go.
Yeah, and that is where you come back. That's where the relational side of accept, forgive, let go. Accept, where they are or where you are, and forgive yourself and others and them, and be able to let go and know that if it was meant to be, it kind of comes back. So.
Well, I'm so excited with the unfolding of, first the epic interpersonal journey from pre-tragic to tragic to post-tragic, and then kind of the interpersonal at a small group, now moving into future. My guess is I know where this will go, but what's impossible for you now that you're making inevitable? What's the current thing that if someone listening could say, I can plug into Keiron to help support that mission?
Well, I think we're still in the it feels impossible phase, but obviously you're my dear partner in so many areas of life, and the work we're doing at the Trust Foundation is kind of the phase of it just feels impossible. And I guess using the same techniques, I hadn't thought about it this way, but it's just like stay present in the moment, trust in the process. But yeah, the work we're doing to combat the widespread breakdown of trust in society, what we call the trust apocalypse, and the journey that we're 3.5 years in, I guess, for you and me, from January 2022, sitting in that small little cafe in the hotel where I was talking to you about what the hell happened over the last decade. I had such high hopes of what we were doing when I was doing Web 2.0, and I certainly wasn't a founder of Facebook or anything, but founder of a tech startup in the Web 2.0 social media space. I was kind of more in as I said, the building what ended up being the precursor to what Pinterest is today in many ways, but social commerce. And we were writing algorithms to figure out how we, get users and get them to come back and use the technology we've been building, the website we've been building, how we get more users, so viral algorithms and attention algorithms. And we thought, as I was thinking in that time period as a technologist, it really felt like what we were doing collectively in the Bay Area, uniting the world. Facebook was not out of the dorm rooms. It was still Friendster is kind of waning. MySpace was on the uprise. Facebook was really yet to come out of the dorm room. And it felt, I think, even through, when we sold our company 2008 and then through 2010, felt like we really were uniting the world and the Arab Spring. And, I kind of got out of the startup game to some degree in various kind of iterations into the 2010s. But as I said to you, looking back, just going, we had such high hopes. What the hell happened over the last decade? Where did it go wrong? It just felt like we've driven the world apart, that we have rising polarization, breakdown in civil discourse. Of course, I blame Facebook at the time. It's a much deeper story than that, as we learn. But I think, I can't remember the exact conversation, but I kind of looked at you and said, there must be something you can do. I've got to do something about this. I feel, somewhat responsible, I guess. What do we do? And that was the beginning of the journey. And I think I pulled you into the beginning of what I call the kitchen cabinet process. And you were really the anchor and remain, the key partner here of the two of us, then pulling in General Craig Nixon. Maybe a year later, as we were understanding, we thought it was all about the information disorder crisis. Breakdown of civil discourse. We riffed on a few ideas. We did some deep research, 2 years in, and we pulled in a few other folks through the process. And then you pulled in Jordan Hall, who was our other partner at the Trust Apocalypse. And all of last year was really our think tank phase of just understanding the nature of this wicked problem, truly a quintessential wicked problem, a problem that defies solution of the widespread breakdown of trust in society that really started back in the late 60s, pre-internet, not necessarily even technology-driven per se, but if you've read Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, and his more recent book, Upswing, kind of charts the beginning of the erosion of social cohesion within communities, the breakdown of kind of trust in each other, if you like, with the changing nature of generations and technology and TV and radio and people becoming more insular. And then the breakdown of trust in our institutions with, the early 70s with the Watergate, the contentious end of the Vietnam War, then rolling through to the breakdown of trust in our informational environment with the repeal of the fairness doctrine and the rise of the shock jocks, Rush Limbaugh and the kind of talking heads on radio, and then obviously on video and TV, and then news becoming a business, being transformed, brought up, Fox News, suddenly it became 24-hour news cycles. If it leads, it bleeds. Suddenly we've got to engage and grab people's attention and sell advertising, and news became a business, all pre-internet. And then the internet comes around, and then social media comes around, and then, hyper-targeted digital advertising in the late 2000s and then early 2010s, which Facebook really perfected and everyone followed, and Google arguably was doing with keyword search, mining attention and selling it to advertisers, and just seeing that transition. So we really have lost trust in each other. We've lost trust in our institutions, arguably for good reason. A lot of our post-World War II institutions are no longer trustworthy, as Jordan would point out, and trust in our informational environment, particularly the internet as exists today. And we looked at that and just said, holy cow, what do you do about it? Knowing that we did not have the answer, but we did have a methodology building on your lived experience during the War on Terror as a Navy SEAL commander, General Nixon's lived experience of being running operations for Joint Special Operation Command, working under General Stan McChrystal, who was running Joint Special Operation Command and was figuring out how to transform Joint Special Operation Command. You talk to that much better, as you have done, from siloed, special operators who were at the top of their game to being a team of teams, a network of networks. And then coming out and partnering up with General Stan McChrystal, yourself and Craig, and starting the McChrystal Group and bringing that team of teams building networks of networks into the corporate setting. And so we, looking at that, and a big realization we had through last year was, well, if we bring the right people together, there's lots of people chipping away. It's the proverbial 6 blind men feeling the elephant. A lot of people chipping away, but not necessarily seeing the bigger problem. If we could bring people together, the right people, get them connected at the right time, and trust in the process, magic's going to happen. And so, that's our process. That's the methodology we're applying at the Trust Foundation. It feels pretty damn near impossible right now to even imagine that we're going to actually make a change. But it was your presentation that I sat in back in January 2022, where your last slide that you put up was that quote from the Talmud that said, "You may not finish the work, but neither are you excused from it." So we're here because of you, because of that. Kick up the backside for me to kind of say, holy cow, I don't know what I can do, and I don't know as if I have the answer, but it was a calling that felt, this is a existential crisis for our society, for certainly Western society, not just here in the US. Obviously, I'm an American citizen now, originally hailed from the UK, so our society is, just felt like it was breaking apart, and upstream of everything that we saw of civil discourse, information disorder, truth, the breakdown of truth was trust. And so the mission we're on to bring together and build this catalytic community of the intelligence function at the bottom of our triangle, the people with resources, whether it's their relationships, their expertise, or their capital as angel investors, using our intelligence function to direct those resources to the right action, which is the innovators, the founders, the social entrepreneurs, who all have ideas on how to rebuild and believe in the mission, but have ideas on how to rebuild trust in community, rebuild social cohesion, rebuild or build new institutions that are trustworthy, that are fit for this digital age, or rebuild our internet, our information and environment, so that we can truly have uniquely verifiable humans connecting to uniquely verifiable humans, sharing verifiable information, so we can once again know who we're, the analogy you use, sitting around the campfire with, who we're sharing information, who we're receiving information from. So, that's our theory of change, knowing that we're not the ones necessarily to solve the problem. This is a wicked problem. It will defy solution. But we can do our part to be the stewards of this community, to bring them together under the umbrella of the Trust Foundation, and obviously working towards our inaugural convening for the Trust Foundation on the Trust Apocalypse in October, in partnership with General Sam McChrystal and the work he's doing with his latest book about character, bringing all of those together. I mean, General McChrystal has been one of our strategic advisors. We're using the methodology that he really pioneered, that you guys lived, that you then brought into the corporate world. We're now applying to this problem, this quintessential wicked problem. So it feels damn near impossible right now. Hopefully we can have a conversation and another podcast in many years and say, hey, here's how it, of course it was inevitable. What I hold to, as you look at, how do you go from impossible to inevitable? Trust in the process. Trust in the independence I have with my 3 partners here and with Chris Licht as well. Coming together, the right people, turning up at the right time, the partnership with General Stan McChrystal. I don't know how this plays out. So I just have to surrender to the journey and know that if I just keep kicking the can down the road. The old analogy that I got from one of my business mentors, Keith Cunningham, used to say, if I asked you to kick a can a mile down the road, you would tell me it's impossible. But if you just kick the can every day, you will kick it a mile down the road. And so it feels like our journey from impossible to inevitable right now is we're deep in it, feels impossible, but we have a methodology. We just have to trust in the process and keep kicking the can and doing the small incremental steps, bringing people together, standing up an angel network so that we can look at some of the companies and the founders, evaluate them both from a impact, will they make an impact on helping restore a level of trust in our communities, in our institutions, or in the internet, the information environment? Are they viable businesses that we could legitimately say, hey, this is a great investment? Great, let's channel the resources of our angel network. We've got to do more thought leadership, hence, you started your podcast, and we're starting to, put the word out there and write our white papers and policy pieces, and obviously building the community is anchored on putting together the inaugural conference. I don't think 3 years ago plus, when we sat there in that little cafe and said, there got to be something we can do about this, I had no idea what journey we were even on, let alone what the outcome might be, or even what the problem was. I just knew that, for me at that stage of my life, there was a calling to do something. And so I just did something, the smallest thing I thought I could do, which was just ask you to partner with me and say, let's just kick the tires on this thing every week. Let's just jump on a call and pull a few other people in. I don't know any other way to get started than, we just pull together this kitchen cabinet and we just kick the tires. And it's been a journey. It's the hardest lesson as an entrepreneur is patient, and this has taken a lot of patience, to say the least.
Well, even as you talk about the fascinating, time bending forward and backward, through history, where I met General McChrystal and General Nixon. But to be clear, I was the benefactor of the process they put in place. I was the young guy. I was like, oh, of course, this is how we solve every problem. And the incredible courage that they took to take the ego out of. If you imagine what makes special operators great is the complete confidence that they are the only ones that have the answer. And so, the ability to now drive interoperability because of the crisis. The crisis was we were going to lose the war. And at the time, terrorism looked like, hey, we're going to have a Twin Towers attack infinite number of times. And thankfully, we've never had another one. And then because of that process, and because I knew it was crucially important that I learned to become the best leader I did, that's how we met at that conference, right? We were both on a quest. Like, hey, at the time I was running from scarcity. Like, hey, if I'm not fast enough, someone gets injured. And then moved into how do we be pulled by abundance? How do we be pulled by the joy? And then the incredible story that you've shared with us of here's the methodology for getting from pre-tragic to post-tragic. The experience across the tiny community of 6 with the Badgers, and then now, okay, how do you build that catalytic community where each of us can now feel seen, heard, and understood, and bring all of our superpowers to bear in the most dynamic environment? The most challenging thing is the language isn't even the same. The technologist doesn't speak the same language as the resource person, and specifically not as the J2 or the intelligence personnel that are looking 300 years out in the future and go, hey, here's where this thing's going to land. You're like, I know, but I'm right here. And so it's fascinating. How do you now get to that common context where we all don't know and we're comfortable in the not knowing?
Yeah, it is definitely I guess the very definition of a faith-based initiative is not knowing how, they're, literally not knowing where we're even trying to get to necessarily. What the steps of the process are unclear, but just having the faith of we won't get there. And even if we don't get there, and again, that was the quote that you put up on the screen, even if it's not mine to finish, neither am I excused from it, which means I have a role to play as an actor. And I think and I'd never framed it this way, but your pre-tragic, tragic, post-tragic, it's kind of that was almost part of our journey over the last 3 years, to be able to get to this point of empowered action, faith that this will lead to a better place, a better world, a better outcome. We had to go through, and I know Jordan has been, our other partner, has been looking at this for probably 15 years as a kind of deep systems thinker, looking at society and civilization as a whole, to be able to kind of go from the pre-tragic to the tragic, to get to the post-tragic, where we can, again, we may not know the path, but we're in that state prepared to take action that we would not take if we were we were still stuck in the pre-tragic woe is me, or the pre-tragic kind of unaware, rather, no idea that there's even a problem or a tragedy, the tragedies phase of kind of woe is me, but to get the other side of that, that, I hadn't thought about it, but I guess that's been the journey we've collectively been on. But also to get the clarity coming out into that stage to say, okay, it's all about trust. Okay, we've got Pew research and polls from Gallup and others that kind of show the widespread breakdown of trust in society and trust in each other. Okay, great. So we've got a very clear understanding now. Now we can move forward from that basis. And it's, as I say, it's felt very impossible through the journey. And I guess maybe that's the other part of it, is sometimes, we look at everyone else and say, oh my God, look at how successful they are. With all the fears, uncertainties and doubts that I have, and, particularly on a journey like this, all the uncertainties I have, which I have going through me all the time, most mornings when I wake up, of, how can I ever make a difference? How could I even do this? But what we don't realize is those other people are successful, not because they do not have fears, uncertainties and doubts, but because they didn't let them stop them. They didn't let those fears, uncertainty and doubt hold them back or stop them from taking action. And I think that's kind of the phase we're in at the moment, despite all the fear, uncertainty and doubt about how the hell we can, have an impact here on the widespread breakdown of trust in society. It is, we move forward despite not knowing, despite that uncertainty, because we know it's too important not to.
One, to me, like, as you said that, it all comes up where, of course, because the fear vanishes when we're doing it in service to each other, right? It flashed me back to that moment in the helicopter where look across the helicopter and give the head nod, my life and yours and mine, and now each person became individually their best self. They wholly had their individual superpowers, and the collective, because they now knew that everyone had each other's back, could do things that could never be done any other way. The way you could get superhuman capabilities from very average humans, the definition of making the impossible the inevitable. And so that really is the essence of the mission, is how do we now get to the point where we can all remove the illusion of separation and allow us to now move collectively to create a better society that is worthy of our children and grandchildren's trust.
Yeah, I think when we at the offsite, when we had the vision of preserve for our children and grandchildren communities and institutions that are worthy of their trust, I think that still holds true and really grounds us in the work we're trying to do. And the interdependence of, without you, it would have just been me, and I would not have had the faith or belief in myself to think I could even do something about it. But just having you by my side, and then the fact that you were able to pull in Craig, who listened to the two crazies here talking about this. Again, we didn't have the language for it even back then, and saying, well, if Curt thinks this is a good idea, then I'm in, type of thing, and having the faith. And then obviously the same with Jordan and then Chris as we kind of progress down the road. And I have we could not have done this without each other. I could not have had any hope of, this became inevitable because of the collective, because of the independence, because when I have the moments of despair, I look and say, well, I can't let my brothers down, my partners down, and I have to keep pushing through and believing that we can do this, even when everything says that, when I'm telling myself that we can't. So it's and the catalytic community, this is the term we borrowed from someone else, if you like. None of us really know what this catalytic community is ever going to be, or what it even means to build a catalytic community, but it's just the language we now use to say, this is the work we're doing. We're going to figure it out as we go. And it's only because I always work, I think, best with others and in partnership. I think it's only because there is a collective that we are even where we are at this point. So, impossible to inevitable. How do you make something that feels impossible inevitable? Maybe it's through others.
In service to others. I don't know if there's any parting shot after that. How do people get a hold of you to join you in the quest?
Well, they can go to, not that we have a lot of information up at the moment, hopefully over time we'll get more added up there, but thetrustfoundation.org. They can certainly email me either info@thetrustfoundation.org or Keiron@thetrustfoundation.org. And obviously we're putting the bat signal up here for anyone who sees the challenges, certainly when it comes to trust in society. We're starting to gather more people around. You can check out some of my personal story on my blog that I started shortly after my accident, onehandedblogger.com. I haven't posted a little while on there, but you can certainly read about some of my Ironman journeys and races. You can kind of catch up on that. And otherwise, I'm not on social media, so you will, I don't use my Facebook account. The work that I'm doing has made me so aware of the nature of these platforms and the perverse incentives that I do not wish to be part of them, other than LinkedIn is the only one that I am still, for personal, professional reasons, still connected to, and still somewhat, I check out periodically. But yes, I've got accounts on all of these platforms, but I'm afraid if you reach out to me on those, you won't actually find me. I took myself off. As I said, in a consumer economy, if you don't like what the business does, and you get to vote with your feet and remove yourself from their platform, and that's certainly what I've done.
Well, thank you, my brother, for your friendship, partnership, brotherhood, mentorship, and all the things. You are the embodiment of my favorite anonymous quote: if you think something's impossible, don't interrupt the individual that's doing it.
Well, thank you, and you are my dear brother in arms and soulmate, and just such a blessing to have had you in my life, and likewise would not have been through a whole bunch of my transitions or even anywhere near to the work we're now doing if it was not from you. So thank you, sir. Thank you for everything you are and the work you're trying to do in the world, and love you.
Most people don't realize they're wearing a mask, which hides their true power without even knowing it. But the people you work with, your friends, your family, and the world need you to step into the power of your authentic self. Take our free mask assessment to uncover which of the 15 masks you are unconsciously wearing that shapes your life and how you can start to break free. Start your journey at akeypartners.com and step into the power of your authentic self.